Today we're tackling a story that really blew up March 2025. You might remember
释永信
the famous abbot of the Shaolin temple.
Right, the face of Shaolin martial arts, this, deeply spiritual figure.
Exactly. And suddenly he's under investigation for, well, alleged massive financial crimes. It was all over the news.
And the figures being thrown around were just, unbelievable. Some reports claimed his personal assets hit $150 billion. Billion with a B.
Which apparently put him second only to Elon Musk globally. It's just wild.
It absolutely forces you to stop and think. How does a Buddhist figure, someone who's supposed to be all about emptiness and detachment from worldly things...
Yeah, how do they end up with that kind of staggering wealth that just doesn't compute with the image we have?
And it turns out this wasn't just some modern corruption story. It actually brought this long-buried historical issue back into the light, the sheer economic power that Buddhist monasteries have wielded in the past.
So the traditional picture of monks just meditating quietly, maybe tending a garden, it's not the whole story.
Not even close sometimes. That image often hides a much more complex reality of, well, institutions managing significant assets and influence.
释永信
In this case, dramatic as it is really a modern echo of something very old.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. Let's dig into the ancient roots of this monastic economic power. Where did it come from? How did it fade? And, how do those echoes show up today?
Exactly. We need to understand how religion throughout history has tried to balance faith with, well, the undeniable pull of the secular world.
All right, let's start with the Shaolin CEO idea. People actually called
释永信
the person in Buddhism who best understands business and the person in business who is best at chanting sutras. That's quite the combination.
It really is. And if you look at it from a business strategy angle, his approach was pretty clever. You could call it asymmetric competition.
Asymmetric. How so?
Well, he used his unique religious identity, the Shaolin brand, essentially as his core advantage. Then he bolted on modern business thinking. It let him carve out a totally new path, way beyond the traditional monastery model.
And he was definitely leaning into the modern world. I mean, visiting Google and Apple headquarters back in 2014, that's not typical abbot behavior.
Not at all. And then giving a speech at Meta in 2023 called When Zen Meets AI. He was actively merging Buddhist philosophy with cutting-edge tech and business to expand Shaolin's influence culturally and commercially.
It sounds so 21st century, but you're saying this isn't actually new.
That's the fascinating part. The shock people felt about his reported wealth really comes down to forgetting our history, or maybe just not knowing it. Because Buddhist monasteries were already incredibly powerful economic players 1,000 years ago during China's Tang Dynasty.
1,000 years ago, wow. So this modern CEO monk phenomenon has deep, deep roots.
Very deep. There's this historian, He Zhiquan, who argued that these Chinese Buddhist monasteries were, in their fundamental structure and function, completely identical to the Christian churches in medieval Western Europe.
Identical. That seems unlikely given the different contexts.
Well, maybe not identical in every detail, but in the type of institution they became. During their respective medieval periods, both evolved into these complex organizations, part religious, yes, but also part economic, part social, even part political. The way they grew, the kind of power they held, especially economically, remarkably similar logic.
So a global pattern almost.
Yeah.
Different religions, different cultures, but a similar trajectory towards institutional power.
Exactly. And it wasn't random. It seems to boil down to three main driving forces that allowed these powerful composite organizations to emerge.
Okay, what are they?
First, you need the vacuum created by a chaotic era. Second, there's this constant, complex power play between the religious institutions and the secular rulers. And third, crucial for Buddhism, was its economic adaptability, especially Mahayana Buddhism fitting into the Manor economy.
Chaos, power plays, and adaptability.
Got it. Let's unpack that first one, the vacuum of chaos. You mentioned synchronicity between the East and West.
Yeah, it's quite striking. Look at the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, the Eastern Han in China, the Roman Empire in the West, both relatively stable, powerful. Buddhism and Christianity, still pretty minor, relatively speaking.
Okay, the Golden Ages, sort of.
Right, but then things fall apart. China enters the Three Kingdoms period, then the long, messy northern and southern dynasties, chaos. In the West, you get the crisis of the 3rd century, the Western Roman Empire eventually collapses, total turmoil.
And that's when religion booms.
Precisely.
Right.
An unprecedented boom for Buddhism in China during those chaotic centuries, and Christianity really takes hold and comes to dominate Europe during its own Dark Ages.
Why then specifically? Why does chaos breed religion? Well, think about what happens when secular governments break down. They become dysfunctional. Their core jobs, collecting taxes, providing security, basic public services, they often just stop doing them effectively.
Okay, so taxes. You see the system just disintegrate.
Totally. Central governments lose control. Local warlords or officials skim everything off the top. Corruption goes through the roof. The state treasury ends up empty even if people are being taxed heavily.
And no money means no army. No.
Exactly. You can't pay soldiers, you can't equip them. So the government becomes basically powerless to resist invaders or rebels. In China's northern and southern dynasties, some regimes literally couldn't even feed their armies. Imagine trying to run a state like that.
And public services just disappear. Like the famous Roman roads.
They fall into disrepair, yeah. And forget about relief for the poor or aid during famines. People are displaced, starving, and the government offers nothing. It's a complete failure of the state.
So religion steps into that void.
It does. Not militarily, maybe, but in crucial social ways. Monasteries often became safe havens. They'd open their granaries during famines. Prominent monks sometimes provided free medical care, okay? Maybe some accounts are exaggerated, but the function was real.
They're providing real, tangible help when no one else is.
Yes. And just as importantly, they offered spiritual comfort. Think about Buddhism's ideas of karma, reincarnation, universal salvation. In a world that seems random and brutal, that offers a framework, a sense of meaning, and crucially, hope.
Okay, so chaos creates the need. That leads to the second driver, the power play between religion and the state.
Right, because even failing states or new rulers trying to establish themselves recognize the influence religion now had. So this subtle cooperative relationship often formed. It was pragmatic.
Governments needed legitimacy, especially in chaotic times.
Exactly. So they'd offer support, land grants, tax exemptions, official patronage. In return, the religious institutions would often provide an endorsement, lending the rulers that much-needed legitimacy. Think of papal coronations in Europe.
All right, the emperor gets the divine right to rule from the Pope.
And the Pope gets political and military backing. It's a two-way street. In China, during the northern and southern dynasties, you had these non-Han-Hu rulers in the north. They often felt culturally insecure compared to the traditional Han elite.
So they use Buddhism.
Yeah, they often embraced Buddhism itself, seen as a foreign religion, almost like their own Hu gods. It helped create a distinct identity for their rule and unite diverse populations under their banner.
Was it always just calculation, though? Or did some rulers genuinely believe?
Oh, absolutely. You had rulers like Emperor Taiwu of Northern Wei, known for being quite brutal, who were also apparently devout Buddhists, showering monasteries with wealth and privileges. There were definitely irrational, faith-based factors at play, too.
But this cozy relationship couldn't last forever.
Never does. It's inherently fragile. As soon as secular rulers felt strong enough, they'd inevitably try to claw back the power and, more importantly, the resources they'd given away. That's when cooperation turns to conflict.
The classic church-state struggles.
Yep. In Europe, endless fights between popes and emperors over who gets to tax people, who gets to appoint bishops. In China, you get these big state-led persecutions of Buddhism, the 3 Wus and 1 Zong.
3 Wus and 1 Zong. What were those?
They refer to 4 different emperors across different dynasties. Emperor Taiwu of Northern Wei, Emperor Wu of Northern Zhou, Emperor Wuzong of Tang, and Emperor Shizong of later Zhou, who launched major crackdowns on Buddhism.
And the motivation wasn't really about religious disagreement.
Not primarily. At its core, it was a struggle for resources. 2 things especially: people and money.
People. How so?
Well, monks and nuns were exempt from taxes and state labor duties. So, surprise, surprise, lots of people would get fake ordinations just to dodge their obligations, like a huge early form of tax evasion.
So it drained the state's manpower and tax base.
Massively. And then there was the struggle for precious metals. Monasteries built huge statues, commissioned elaborate artworks, all using vast amounts of gold, silver, and especially copper.
Copper like for coins.
Exactly. This took so much metal out of circulation that it actually impacted the state's ability to mint currency and manage the economy. So these persecutions were basically the state trying to take back its economic privileges, seize monastery wealth, and force monks and nuns back into the tax system.
Okay, that makes sense. Which brings us to the third driver, adaptability. You said this was key to why Buddhism thrived even under the strong Tang Dynasty, and why it bounced back from some persecutions but not others.
Yes, adaptability, particularly within Mahayana Buddhism. See, there was this internal split in Buddhism. You had Hinayana, which was arguably closer to the original teachings.
Focused on individual enlightenment, self-liberation.
Right, and they had really strict rules about monks handling money or property. That was supposed to be managed by lay followers, the Jingran.
So the spiritual leaders weren't the managers.
Yeah.
Sounds inefficient.
It was. It created this weird disconnect. The people with religious status didn't control the finances, and the people controlling the finances didn't have the top religious status. It really hampered their ability to, grow the institution economically.
But Mahayana Buddhism was different.
Radically different in this respect. Mahayana's core idea is about liberating oneself and others, universal salvation. This philosophy allowed for, let's say, adaptive adjustments. Mahayana monks could directly manage monastery property.
And that changed everything.
It completely unleashed the economic potential. Monks started developing real economic management skills. They weren't just meditating. They were organizing labor, running businesses, engaging in finance, lending money, investing funds, using the profits for charity.
Wow, so they became entrepreneurs, essentially, aligning it with their mission of compassion.
You could say that. They became incredibly effective economic engines, and this happened to fit perfectly with the dominant economic system of the time in China, the Manor economy.
The Manor economy. Like feudal Europe.
Sort of, but with Chinese characteristics. Basically, powerful aristocratic clans owned vast tracts of land and controlled large numbers of dependent peasants who worked that land. Land was the basis of wealth and power.
And monasteries fit into this system?
They became major players within it. They acquired huge land holdings, often through donations from those same aristocratic clans. There was this relationship of both competition and integration.
Why would Confucian clans donate to Buddhist monasteries?
Well, Confucianism is very focused on kinship, on family lines. Buddhism offered something different. It could transcend kinship. Its openness attracted all sorts of people, providing a huge pool of labor and talent that the manors needed. Clans valued the monastery's ability to organize manpower, even if they followed different philosophies.
So monasteries essentially became powerful manor lords themselves.
Yeah. Exactly. So back in the chaotic northern and southern dynasties, the monasteries had two engines, the power vacuum and their fit with the manor economy. When the Tang Dynasty brought stability, the first engine, the chaos vacuum, faded. But the second engine, the manor economy, was still going strong. That's why monasteries reached their absolute peak of prosperity in the early and mid-Tang.
Okay, peak prosperity. But then came the decline after Emperor Wuzong's persecution in the mid-Tang. What changed? Why didn't they bounce back that time?
Because something fundamental shifted in the background. A technological revolution, almost invisible but incredibly powerful. The arrival of the curved moldboard plow.
A plow? Seriously? How could a piece of farm equipment bring down these massive monastic economies?
It sounds small, but think about the existing technology. Before this, the common method was the 2-oxen beam lift plow. Heavy iron needed 2 oxen, usually 3 people to operate. Great for turning over lots of soil, but
Only feasible for large operations like manors that had the animals and manpower.
precisely. Your average peasant farmer couldn't afford or manage that setup. It gave large estates, including monasteries, a huge built-in advantage in agricultural production.
Okay, so what was so special about the new plow?
The curved moldboard plow had several key improvements: lighter frame, easier to steer, adjustable depth. But the absolute killer feature, it was efficient enough that it could be operated by a single farmer, often without needing oxen at all.
One farmer, no oxen.
Wow.
That really is a game changer.
It completely democratized efficient farming. Suddenly, individual small peasant households could cultivate land effectively on their own. They could compete with the big manors.
So as this new plow spread across China in the mid to late Tang,
The entire economic landscape shifted. The individual small peasant economies started to replace the manor economy as the dominant force, and the monastic economy, which was built on the foundation of the manor system, large land holdings, dependent labor.
it lost its foundation.
Exactly. Their land assets became less valuable because smallholders were now more efficient. Their dependent peasants left to farm independently. Their main source of income, the revenue from these vast estates, just dried up.
So incense offerings and donations continued, I assume?
Oh, sure, they remained religious centers. But they never regained that kind of massive, land-based economic power that influenced state finances. The technological shift pulled the rug out from under their old economic model.
Which brings us back full circle in a way. We trace this arc from ancient manors, peaking in the Tang, declining due to a plow, and then we see figures like
是永信
emerging in the 21st century.
Right. The tradition of monasteries being involved in economic activity never completely died out, obviously. And in modern times, you see attempts to revive it, often through commercial operations. Shi Yongsan is maybe the most prominent and controversial example.
His business logic you mentioned earlier, using the religious brand, integrating culture, tourism, commerce.
It's essentially a modern replica of the old principle, just adapted for today's economy. Instead of manors, he built a Shaolin IP ecosystem, martial arts schools, performances, merchandise, branding, even leveraging the internet and tech. It's about asset appreciation using the religious identity as the core.
And the fact that his alleged wealth became such a huge story in 2025, you think that connects to what was happening in China's economy then?
I think so, yeah. China's overall economy was facing downward pressure, but interestingly, in some areas with strong Buddhist traditions, there was actually a rise in religious consumption.
People turning to religion in uncertain times.
Seems likely. More economic uncertainty might lead people to seek spiritual solace, maybe donate more. This counter-cyclical trend could have made monastery finances, especially large ones like Shaolin's, grow noticeably, making their scale more visible and perhaps more subject to scrutiny. The boom paradoxically made the large assets harder to hide.
It really feels like that Buddhist saying, one thought to become a Buddha, one thought to become a demon. This whole relationship between religion and money seems like such a double-edged sword.
It absolutely is. You can argue moderate economic activity is necessary, even good. It supports the religion, allows it to perform social functions, do charity work. But when does it cross the line?
Right. When does it become excessive commercialization, where the religion risks losing its actual spiritual core and just becomes, as you put it, a vassal of profit?
That's the tightrope they have to walk. It's not just a historical puzzle. It's a living challenge for any powerful institution, religious or secular.
So from those ancient Tang Dynasty manors, funded by land and labor, to
是永信
modern billions allegedly built on intellectual property and global branding. This deep dive really highlights that enduring tension. How do you balance your core mission with the constant, powerful pull of worldly wealth and influence? It makes you wonder, is a modern IP ecosystem a more stable foundation for a religious institution than ancient farmland ever was, or is it just a different kind of vulnerability? If you found this discussion useful, maybe learned something new, definitely hit that subscribe button. We do these deep dives regularly, exploring valuable ideas.
We appreciate you tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.